Working with clients is only one part of what we do. Another part is communicating with supervisors, coworkers, parents, and stakeholders. So, how can we communicate effectively and professionally?
Hi, I'm Shira.
And I'm Shayna.
We are behavior analysts who create weekly content about how to teach kids with autism so that they make real progress. And we create shareable resources to make your job just a little easier. Today's topic is all about professional communication and feedback. And if you want more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on new video releases.
So, when I was a teenager, I also was a server at a restaurant. And, I loved it there. And, some days were busier than others, but on a really busy day in particular, we were all really stressed out. And I remember this day so vividly in my head still. And my manager pulled me aside and he basically yelled at me. He was giving me negative feedback, but it was in a very, he yelled at me and it was really hurtful and disrespectful. And I went home that night and I was crying. And I was really worried about approaching him. I wanted to approach him and give him feedback on that because it's not acceptable to talk to anyone that way. But at the same time, I did have to take his criticism because you know what? He was right. There were certain things I wasn't doing properly. But I was really nervous and, to be able to speak to an adult. I was younger. It was one of my very first experiences having to pull, my boss aside and say, hey, so, I talked it over with my mom. We actually practiced, we role played. And the next day I very respectfully went in and said, hey, can I talk to you alone? I need to run something by you. And I stayed very calm and we went over things. And it was really awesome because we had a really truthful and honest conversation. And I think he respected me more after that day. And I respected him more after that day because I got to hear his point of view too. And we had a real conversation. So that was a real turning point in my life. And thank goodness actually that I had that experience because from a very young age, I was able to learn, what? Conversations are worth having. And even, though someone's your supervisor or your direct boss, your direct manager, it's okay to, go up to them and talk to them about how they treated you or how you need to be treated because that is what's being respectful. You just need to make sure that you're doing it in a manner that is not a defensive or it's not on the offensive. You're not yelling. It's very calm and just having that conversation.
So we're going to talk about communication and feedback, mostly from an ABA therapist or RBT's perspective. As an ABA therapist or RBT, they are the in-between person between the BCBA, between the parents, stakeholders, colleagues. There are a lot of opportunities for communication, potentially miscommunication, and also the opportunities to receive and give feedback. So in terms of their communication with the BCBA, there's often opportunities to communicate about what programs the client needs, where there might be some discrepancies within the program, something that they don't understand, if they're trying to implement a behavior protocol and something might not be working, if there was a crisis or an emergency, all of that stuff needs to be communicated. And BCBAs and stakeholders need to know that those things have happened.
RBTs, ABA instructors, teachers know students better than the BCBA typically. BCBA will come in, every couple weeks, once a month, and, see a student, whereas, the teacher, the instructor, the RBT is with a student so often that they're going to know that student more. So as an RBT, you have every right to approach your BCBA and say, hey, I have an idea for programming, or hey, this thing that we were supposed to be implementing, let's look at these data, but it's not working. Can we try something else instead? So you have every right to do that.
And then there are going to be opportunities for you to also receive feedback. And that feedback is going to come from either supervisors, colleagues. We're going to talk a little bit later about how to receive that feedback. But what you want to be thinking about is also think about how you're receiving it with your verbal and nonverbal communication. So if someone is talking to you, making sure that you're not rolling your eyes, you're not making uncomfortable sighs or your body posture. This is your opportunity to understand what's going on here. What can I do better? What can we clarify? If there's something unclear, it should be a conversation. It should be something that's resolved. It's not the time to get defensive. And so think about how you're receiving that feedback from all angles.
And on the other side of the coin, let's talk about the giving feedback. So when you're giving feedback, making sure that, that feedback is genuine, right? And that you're giving feedback sometimes to supervisors, sometimes to colleagues, sometimes to parents. When we're giving that feedback, we probably want to pull that person off to the side. It's not great to give feedback in a large group of people, especially if it's individualized feedback. But assume that everyone's trying their best. Assume the best in someone as you're giving that feedback, instead of always taking that being on the defensive, right? Think about the timing of the feedback. So you might go home and let it stew overnight and then come back the next day, but you want that timing to be as immediate as possible. If you bring something up from a year and a half ago, it's not really going to, you don't have any leg to stand on when you're doing that. Make sure it's comfortable for them to receive it. We're going to talk about the professional feedback model in a second, but when you're giving that feedback, smile, be gentle, have a calm voice when you're giving that feedback, making sure the calmer you are, the more open other people are to receiving that feedback. You can also ask people, even when you start a job, or as you're pulling them aside, you can ask them how they prefer to receive feedback. Some people say, just write it down, send me an email. And other people are saying, this is too personal, don't write me an email, like, please come talk to me if there's anything up.
So there is a professional feedback model that was created by Princeton Childhood Development Institute that talks about 8 steps in giving feedback and making it professional, but also effective. So the first thing you want to do is provide some sort of like praise at the start. Find something that someone is doing well, and be specific about it. Not just like, you're doing a great job, but I really liked how you spoke to that student and were able to calm them down really, really quickly.
And be genuine. It's not just about, hey, I like your shirt, now let me tell you what you're doing wrong. It's very much about being genuine and being very behavior specific.
Yeah. And then you can talk about what is not working. So here's the issue. This is why we're meeting. It could be because you're not implementing the behavior plan the way that it's written. And then you want to give the rationale for that. Well, when you're not implementing the way it's written, it means that it reduces the efficacy of the treatment. Not everybody's doing the same thing. It could be potentially dangerous. That's not what the data are showing, whatever reason that you have for that need. And then you always want there to be something solution based. So here's the solution. I can make the behavior plan clearer. I can put it into this format. We can meet about it. We can role play. You can ask me your questions. Any one of those things could be potential solutions.
When you're giving feedback, you don't want to just tell them what's wrong. You're not doing this, and you're not doing this, you're not doing this. That's what people are hearing, but you need to tell them what they should be doing, what they can be doing. Here's some solutions. So instead, why don't we try this? Or I prefer it when, you do something this way instead.
And that could be a collaborative effort. What is the solution that we can come up with together? And that could be something that we both talk about. Then you want to make sure that your request has been acknowledged. So, say it back to me. What did we just talk about? Is this clear? They do this a lot in like marriage counseling, right? When 2 people are speaking different languages, there's always like, let me see if I got this right. And then you want to ask for feedback. So maybe, reviewing what you just talked about. How did that go for you? What did you like? What did you not like? And then, expressing that your continued interest in supporting them. I want to continue to support you. How can I help? How can I prevent this from happening again? How can we make this clearer for next time? And then last but not least, obviously some sort of appreciation statement. I really value our time together. I value how much you're interested in helping the clients and your motivation to be here. Some sort of statement that, makes it sound good.
Thanks so much for talking to me today, even though I told you how terrible you are. No kidding. The next thing would be just looking at some obstacles, right? So when we're giving feedback, Sheer and I were actually discussing this before we started recording, and it was just like, oh, sometimes I just hate giving feedback. And we start talking about, well, why? Feedback is really awesome when you can have a really great conversation. But sometimes it's just fear, right? It's like, oh, sometimes I just fear that I'm not going to say the right thing, or it's going to be interpreted differently than what I mean. And that can be scary. And that's why you want to practice. And sometimes I practice in my car on the way to work, or I'll practice in front of the mirror. And yes, I still do that. But one of those obstacles would be fear.
And what I'm often afraid to give feedback, to be honest. And one of the things that I tell myself is that whether I say it or not, I'm still communicating something. So if I'm afraid of saying something and so I don't say it, that's also communicating something. It could be communicating like underlying resentment, where like maybe I avoid the person or I'm not honest about their performance. Or maybe it's communicating some sort of approval just by me not acknowledging what I'm unhappy with. That means that I'm approving of what's going on. And that's also, some sort of communication. So I try to remind myself that I'm not helping by saying nothing. I'm actually could be making it worse.
That's huge, right? So, if someone's on their cell phone at work and it's aggravating you, but you don't say anything about it, it's like you're condoning it, and then it just gets worse. So, making sure that you can try and overcome your fear so that you can actually say something. A big thing would also be insufficient practice, right? If you're just getting into this field, it is hard to give feedback to, your supervisor, especially, but it's also hard to give feedback to clients or sorry, to colleagues, because you want people to like you, and you think, oh, if I give them feedback on specific things, they may not like me anymore. And that's a myth in and of itself, but just practicing it. And like I said, I practice in my mirror, I practice in my car, but looking at that, what we call the BST, or the behavior, help me out
Skills
here.
training.
Thank you. Why did I gap on that? I do it all the time. Behavior skills training, in terms of, okay, so I'm going to give an instruction first, or as I'm talking to somebody, very similar to the PCDI model of performance feedback. It's like, hey, I'm going to give you, a reason for this. And then, maybe we can do it together. It's that rehearsal piece, I'm going to show, or the modeling piece, I'm going to show you, and then the rehearsal, we'll do it together, and then you do it by yourself, and I'll give you feedback on that. And sometimes you just need more and more practice with that.
And a couple other things that keep us from giving proper feedback are things like misinterpretations, where things aren't clear, maybe feeling a little bit intimidated, or feeling like the other person is going to get defensive or not accept responsibility. All of these things are valid. People do get defensive, but if we're giving feedback in a proper way, and I think the key is to make it as clear as possible, make it feel like you're on their side, we're working in a team, we're in this together. How can I make this clear and most palatable as possible?
When I'm giving feedback too, I think about, a lot of the time it's usually a missing skills piece, right? It's not usually the person. Like, it's like, oh, it's not because of you. It's not like this problem isn't indicative of you. You just haven't had the right training. And that could be also true of if you've got to give feedback to a colleague or a supervisor. It's like, you might just not know this. You haven't had the sufficient training. So looking at that piece as well, and trying to always, give other people the benefit of the doubt.
And the same obstacles come up when you're receiving feedback. If you feel yourself getting defensive or being intimidated or not accepting responsibility, then try to stop for a second and understand where that's coming from. Do I need to ask more questions? Is there something I need to clarify? Maybe I need to go home and come back and talk about this tomorrow. But
that's okay. It's okay to say, hey, listen, like, I can't take this right now. Can we please talk about this at another time? Absolutely.
Yeah, because feedback is important for us to be able to give and to receive. And so if you find yourself not being able to receive feedback for any one of those reasons, then try to think about why that is and how you can clarify that with your supervisor or the person that you're working with.
So as an ABA professional, we're often communicating with parents as well. And, parents will sometimes, keep you after session to talk about progress of their child. They may keep you after session to talk about how they heard you creating so much language with their child, and they want to know how to do that. Or sometimes they'll corner you and say, I didn't hear you talking at all. How come? And you're like, help me. But when you're talking with parents, one of the best things I say is try and stick to the data. Instead of saying, well, here's my opinion, or I think that, try and go back to the data. Well, the data say that this, or, he's really making huge gains on this program, or, the data show that he's only doing this percentage of the time.
And try to be, sensitive and compassionate, but also professional. It's not always the time to bring up like major issues, or for parents to be asking you for advice on things that are going on at home. Try to stick to really what's going on. It's always a fine line between disclosing all the information to parents about how challenging that session might have been. They know their kid, they know how hard things are. So trying to balance that with some positivity, but not making it seem like everything is just, roses all the time. So you're kind of finding that balance. And again, refer to the data. You can always talk about what they were struggling with in terms of the program or the data, as opposed to it being, a subjective opinion. And if you are going to mention something that was hard or challenging, always try to have a solution. Like you had a hard time transitioning away from the playground today. Tomorrow we're going to try a visual. So always having some sort of solution. The other thing is, as an ABA therapist or an ABA professional, most of your communication should be either written in SOAP notes or some sort of a communication log that goes home to parents. And you might have some time at the end of session, but those would be limited. So you shouldn't be the one discussing major issues with parents. You can always refer to the BCBA if there's any kind of like tough challenge that's come up or concern that the parent has. You can always refer to your supervisor or your BCBA. That's something that they can help you with.
In the code of ethics for both BCBAs and RBTs, there's something about recognizing your personal bias. And, we all have personal biases, even though we may not even know what they are. So if you are in a family's home or you're working with a client who, you may not have the same political views as the clients, you may not have the same opinions on certain topics as the clients, try and stay away from those. And, try not to let those biases come between you and the client. And if you recognize those biases and they're affecting your work in any way, please tell your supervisor, figure out, how you can either make that better or get off that team in order to benefit the client.
And for more on communicating with parents effectively, check out podcast 116 on that topic.
So for more information on providing feedback to others and accepting criticism, click the link in and around this video or in the description to purchase the Behavior Blueprint and learn more practical tools for ABA professionals. We also encourage you to subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss any future videos, and leave a like and comment below if you have further questions.